You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode number 92 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I'm honored to share a conversation that I had with Jim L. from Birmingham, Alabama. I've known Jim for a number of years through ISO meetings. Jim has done a lot of work, especially with the Literature Committee, or LitCom, and now also serves on the Board of Trustees for the ISO. And just recently, he has been part of a communications group looking at improving communication with the ISO, and I got to take part in one of those survey meetings. We talked about it in our conversation that I was the entertainment chair for the 2018 convention, and I helped out on a committee meeting for the Atlanta convention. I wasn't part of the planning committee, but I shared some of the insights that we had from the Bay Area convention in 2018. Over the past few months, Jim has been the interim editor of the Outer Circle newsletter, which is a bi-monthly newsletter from the ISO and the Literature Committee. And after hearing an episode of the podcast that I did on being grateful to be alive, Jim asked me to write an article for an upcoming issue, which will be focused on gratitude. So I wanted to read a little bit about the Literature Committee, and then I picked out a reading from Voices of Recovery. And I'll put links for a lot of the things that I talk about in this episode in the show notes. And this comes from the LitCom handbook. LitCom is short for Literature Committee. And I wanted to read part of the introduction and history. In preparing this document, the LitCom wishes to remind all who read it that SAA literature does not begin with a few trusted servants who have been elected to service positions within the ISO, but rather arises from individual members of the fellowship, from member groups and intergroups, and from components of the ISO service structure as they identify needs and bring forward ideas about how to carry the message of recovery more effectively to those who are in need. The LitCom encourages all members of SAA to bring their ideas for new or improved literature forward to their local groups, their intergroups, and ultimately the ISO Literature Committee, recognizing that within the fellowship at large, there is great creativity and many fresh ideas that could enhance our ability to help member groups reach the addict who still suffers. That was in the introduction, and in the history and mission. Initially, the primary function of the LitCom was exclusively to review and approve written materials submitted by members of the fellowship for possible publication by the ISO. In this role, the LitCom worked with authors to refine and polish material in preparation for approval and publication. For the most part, the process, albeit slow and deliberate, served the fellowship well and led to the publication of numerous pamphlets and booklets that have been used widely for personal growth of members and outreach to other addicts. When the efforts to write the SAA Green Book was initiated, the role of LitCom was expanded by necessity to include a more active role in planning, editing, and even rewriting of documents that were deemed important or urgent for the fellowship. Emergence of the internet brought a whole new dimension to the world of communications and new possibilities for serving the fellowship and reaching out to others. Also, on several occasions, the delegates have asked the LitCom to develop specific new materials to meet perceived needs of the fellowship. As a result of these changes, on the basis of deliberations by an ad hoc committee of The board and LitCom, in November 2006, the board approved a clarification of the bylaws terms all publications to include all materials published in any medium for ongoing or continuous use by the ISO. This definition expressly covers all printed pamphlets, booklets, manuals, and books, as well as the content of the SAA websites, all audio recordings distributed or sold by the ISO, and all documents prepared by the ISO staff, the Board of Trustees, the committees of the board, or their subcommittees for continuing use within the fellowship. And so one of the things that was neat to really see in process was the development of the book called Voices of Recovery, which submissions came from members of fellowships all around the world. And so I did pick out a reading from Voices of Recovery on the topic of gratitude. And this comes from February 29th, which is on page 60. Gratitude provides a needed perspective on our problems and helps us feel connected with our higher power. And that quote comes from Sex Addicts Anonymous, page 53. I've found that my urge to act out arises most frequently when I am feeling sorry for myself and I am experiencing my core dysfunction beliefs about myself. One of the most powerful tools I've found to turn those self-defeating messages around is to practice gratitude. For me, this is a difficult thing to do, and I have found that it takes practice. Sometimes I have to become what I call primitive in my gratitude list. I have to start by being grateful to be alive. I move on to remind myself that today I have a roof over my head and I have enough to eat and drink. I then move to higher levels of gratitude by reminding myself that I have family and friends. These people care about me even if they are critical of my behaviors or telling me how much I've hurt them. If they didn't care, they wouldn't tell me. They would have just avoided me. Eventually, I can get past thinking about myself to the point that I can be grateful to be of service to someone whose needs I consider and treat with respect. Meetings often provide such opportunities. And the meditation at the end, sincere gratitude can replace the bondage of self and strengthen recovery. And so, I felt that this reading really touched on service and on gratitude, both of those things we really talked about a lot in our conversation. And so, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Jim L. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. So what time? You're, 3 hours ahead?
2.
Okay.
We're in Central Time.
Okay, yeah. I always get confused between Alabama and Georgia.
Well, the time zone line here is the boundary between Alabama and Georgia. And it's really kind of strange because in the winter in particular, we're so close to the eastern edge of Central Time. You know, Central Time goes almost 1,000 miles from here to El Paso. But we're so close that we have the daylight cycle very similar to Atlanta, but we are an hour slower than Atlanta. So in the winter, it gets dark at 4:30.
Wow.
Which is a little bit depressing.
Yeah.
It's always great to get this time of year when things are beginning to brighten up a bit with daylight savings time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got some family that just moved to Boise, Idaho, and they're at the very western edge of, I don't know if that's mountain.
Yeah, mountain time.
Yeah. And so, it was crazy. I was visiting them in the summertime, and it didn't get dark until like 10 o'clock. Yeah. they're much further north, and they're at the very western edge of the time zone. So it was crazy.
Yeah, it can really play games with your brain when you're visiting in places like that you're not accustomed to.
All right, I'll get started here. I'm super excited to have Jim L. here on the podcast, and we've been corresponding for quite a while. And when was the Atlanta, Georgia convention?
It was last May, or last
Yeah.
June. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember you and I being on a call trying to work on organizing the events and stuff. I was
yeah.
the events coordinator for the 2018 convention in the Bay Area. And the call that we had, I was so bummed that we didn't record that because it would have made a fantastic episode for the podcast. So I'm really
Yeah,
grateful to have you on.
very good. It's great to be here.
So yeah, I usually start off the conversation with going with what's in your inner, middle, and outer circle. You comfortable doing that here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem at all. My inner circle is basically no sex with self or anyone outside of a committed relationship. And since I'm not in a committed relationship, that's basically means that I'm celibate
Wow.
in terms of my inner circle. Uh, Middle circle wise, the biggest problem for me is the internet. I can get caught up and start watching videos and start watching things and sometimes they lead to places I don't want to go.
Yeah.
So I can, that's the big one in these days and times. And outer circle, I love to walk in the woods. You see
Yeah.
the background here is not far from here.
Oh, cool.
Um, I love watching the animals, looking for wildflowers, things of that sort. I'm having back trouble. I'm getting kind of old, Jason. I'll turn 82 this
Wow.
summer, and I'm having some low back arthritis type problems, and so I can't walk very far anymore, and I'm missing that. But
Yeah.
that was really a big thing. The other thing is I'm big into both jazz and classical music,
Oh,
so I do.
nice.
That's always a really good escape for me. And one of the great things that I decided to do recently is subscribe to Sirius XM radio so that when I'm driving, going somewhere, I'm listening to really good music.
Nice.
So that's a major thing. And then, of course, big time is service work within
Yeah.
within this fellowship. I,
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time on service work and time actually meditating about the implications of our steps, of our traditions, of the concepts that are currently being worked on, things of that.
Hmm.
So again, in terms of actual time spent, my service work is probably the largest single piece of out of circle activity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I highly recommend it because it's just it keeps me connected to the program, both intellectually and emotionally. And that I have found to be extremely beneficial.
Definitely. Yeah, I do want to get into the some of the major service work that you've done in the program with the ISO and LitCom and the outer circle, and definitely want to get into that. But before getting there, I was really curious to hear your story about how you got into the program of SAA, how long you've been in the program, and things like that.
Yeah, I've been in the fellowship for 22 years. I came in January of 2000
Okay.
at a time when I was waiting to, excuse me, be sentenced and spend a year in federal prison
Mm.
as a result of my addiction. And I was really struggling at that point. I had lost my wife, and my two sons had refused to even talk to me.
Hmm.
And my counselor actually recommended that I attend SAA, and I found a meeting that was in the basement of a counselor's office.
Hmm.
And, it was an interesting experience, Jason, because when I walked in the door and heard the 12 steps for the first time, I was not in another 12 step program. So
Yeah, same here.
I had no background in AA or NA or any of those, but I gave 100% intellectual assent to pardon the emergency alert. We
Yeah.
have a wind warning.
Okay.
Um, I gave intellectual assent to the 12 steps. I said, this makes complete sense to me, but I didn't get a sponsor and I didn't work the steps. And you know the result
Hmm.
of that. I didn't stay sober very long. And then after about 6 months, I went to federal prison, not too far from here.
Hmm.
And then when I came back, I got into the program and got serious, got a sponsor, and worked the steps. And I was sober for 5 years. I had a technical slip 13 years ago.
Hmm.
So I decided to reset my sobriety date. But I've been sober since August of 2010.
Nice. Yeah. I too have had some slips along the way, and I got into the program in 2002. So
Yeah.
just a few years after you did.
Yeah,
And
we're running kind of parallel here.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is my one and only program, so I didn't have any experience with the 12 steps aside from some of my friends that I grew up with. They found the rooms of AA and NA many, many years before me, so I was familiar with it, but no personal experience until I entered the rooms
Yeah.
myself.
Well, that's interesting because my dad, who was a kind of a guy that was constantly involved in community activities, he was not an alcoholic, but once a year he put on a big barbecue event for the local Alcoholics Anonymous
Hmm. Hmm.
group. So I knew AA existed, but I didn't have a drinking problem,
Hmm.
and so it didn't click with me until I actually got in the SAA rooms.
Yeah. Can I ask how you ended up in prison?
Oh yeah, the internet had come along, and I just went head over heels
Hmm.
into the early chat rooms and all this kind of stuff. And in the course of chatting with literally dozens, probably hundreds, if I counted them, of people, there was a 14-year-old that I chatted with, highly inappropriate chat,
Hmm.
but it turned out the 14-year-old was an FBI agent.
Oh, geez.
And so I was accused of the intent of soliciting a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old.
Hmm.
And I was devastated because with literally a 10-minute period, I lost my job, my profession, my family, my reputation. Most of my friends hit the road,
Hmm.
and so I was, it was really devastating. And I pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 months and served actually 13 months in
Hmm.
federal prison. Yeah, I'm convinced that I could have beat it had I gone to court, but just the idea of the publicity of a trial
Yeah.
scared me away. And, in retrospect, I would probably do that, but, that's water under the bridge,
Yeah.
long ago forgiven, and it's not something that concerns me today.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a couple of friends that have had the same exact thing that was a chat with intent, and they were busted by law enforcement for
Yeah.
doing this the same thing.
Yeah. I learned a lot about law enforcement because the FBI agents that went to my home, and I was at work and they went to my home where my wife was. They told her a cock and bull story that was not even close to true,
Oh, geez.
which was really distressing. They call it a ruse when
Hmm.
it's the FBI lying, but if I'm lying, it's a major legal problem.
Yeah. 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 So after the prison, did you find recovery in prison at all, or was it
No,
completely separate?
no, there was nothing in prison. There were AA meetings,
Hmm.
but I did get heavily involved in the religious services, the
Hmm.
Protestant religious services, it was a real treat because I was the only white guy in the choir,
Hmm.
and we did basically black gospel music,
Oh, awesome.
and it was more fun than a barrel of monkeys working with about 20 of these guys who could sing like you wouldn't believe it, and a couple of other musicians, but it kept me engaged and involved. And, I had developed friends there. They would really became good friends. Yeah, I have been quoted as saying that it was almost like a paid vacation.
Oh, wow.
I had not taken a vacation in years. I'm a dreadful workaholic.
Hmm.
And, but I played racquetball every day. I jogged or walked about 5 miles every day and read books. I hadn't read a novel in years, and I read multiple novels and other spiritual type things.
Hmm.
But I didn't really get involved in the program, the SAA program, until I came back.
Okay.
And when I came back to Birmingham, which was in 2001, that's when I dived in and got serious about the program.
Yeah, awesome. And it sounds like with the religious experience that you had at the prison, that steps 2 and 3 were probably fairly easy for you.
Yeah, I the first go around, I probably glossed over them too quickly.
Yeah.
Didn't give them the kind of in depth consideration that they deserve. But there was no question in my mind that I was powerless,
Hmm.
and there was no question in my mind that I needed help. And a local friend of mine summarizes steps 1, 2, 3 as being, "I can't, God can. Maybe I should let Him try."
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Which really kind of fits for me.
Yeah, I've heard that as the step 1, 2, 3 prayer. Just you get them done real quick. I
Yeah,
can't. He can let him.
I think my real best work on steps 1, 2, 3 occurred several years later when I was going back through the steps the second and
Hmm.
the third time, where I spent more time just really contemplating exactly what that step was saying and how that applied to me.
Yeah, and so yeah, it sounds like you've done the steps multiple times. I've done the steps 3 times now.
Yeah, and of course I'm kind of doing the steps when I go through them with the sponsee.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So right now I've got 6 sponsees and
Jeez.
in different places in working the steps, but 3 of them are in that first 4 or 5 step axis
Yeah.
where we're really getting to the details of what it is that's intended by those steps.
Hmm. Yeah, I seem to max out at probably 3 full-time sponsees, but I started taking on temporary sponsees, just getting them set
Yeah,
up with the circles and step 1 and then having them try to find someone else.
yeah,
So that way we don't get a lot of newcomers coming into the program and not having anywhere to go. It's like
yeah.
I get them started and then hopefully by then they can find someone who can take them on full time.
How is the flow of newcomers in your fellowship out in San Francisco?
Um, we are getting a lot, and currently it's weird because I started a noon meeting back in 2006, and that meeting spawned a couple of other meetings, and during the pandemic years, we took those meetings onto Zoom
Yeah,
and created 5 meetings a week out of instead of just the 3. So we had Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we added Tuesday and Thursday. And then eventually we added Saturday and Sunday. So now it's 7 days a week.
yeah.
And oh my God, the amount of newcomers that are coming into that room alone is amazing. But with the pandemic, my home meeting is in Los Altos, which is kind of between. I live in San Jose. It's between San Jose and San Francisco on the
Yeah.
peninsula, and half of the meeting stayed on Zoom, and half the meeting went back in person. So we didn't do a hybrid, and it's real interesting that there are a few of us old timers in the room, but a lot of new people, showing up
Yeah.
and just finding the websites and saying, "Hey, can I join your group?" And so, yeah, we've got quite a few new people coming into the program.
That's good to hear. We had kind of a lull during COVID where we didn't see many newcomers. But last summer we did one of those local mailings that the ISO does,
Mm-hmm,
to sending out that card that explains SAA to all of the counselors in the area. We're seeing an uptick now, a significant number. I'm getting just kind of a rough average, two or three a week, uh, calling or sending an email, a new one tonight and
mm-hmm.
earlier this evening. So it's I'm pleased to see that that's happening.
Yeah,
We're doing we have four face-to-face meetings and four hybrid meetings. Actually, two on Zoom and then two that are on Zoom and in person.
yeah, yeah,
But we're seeing a reluctance to return to
yeah,
face-to-face meetings, and it appears, and this is my assessment of it, that it's a convenience issue. It's just so much easier to walk into the office,
yeah,
turn on the computer than to drive 30 or 40 minutes. And I expect the traffic issues in Bay Area are even
yeah,
much worse than in Birmingham.
yeah,
But there's resistance to getting back to face to face. So our hybrid meetings, there'll be only 2 to 5 people in person, and there'll be 10, 15, 20 even on Zoom.
yeah. When we started back to in person, it took a while. Some of our meetings we started returning in late 2021,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a period of time where we had to go back onto Zoom and then back into in person. But it started off with like four or five, and now the meetings that I've been to in person are generally up to 10 to 15. And I've
Yeah,
seen one of them up to 25.
yeah,
And well, actually, our Saturday morning meetings are starting to thrive again.
yeah,
Up into the 30 range
yeah,
and stuff like that. But yeah, the Saturday morning meetings, I've got three now that I can do on Zoom here in
yeah,
the Bay Area, and all I have to do is roll out of bed and then turn on the computer, and I'm bam right there.
yeah, exactly.
Whereas the San Jose meeting, I'd have to drive probably about 10 minutes. If I wanted to do the San Francisco meeting, that's an hour drive for me.
Yeah.
And so I had to get up really early and go to that. And so the convenience of Zoom makes it a lot easier just to hop on a meeting really quickly.
Yeah, but I think, Jason, that the fellowship that we miss on Zoom is significant.
Big time.
When a newcomer comes to one of our in-person meetings, multiple people will take time with that person
Hmm.
to give them different perspectives and so on. That doesn't happen as readily on Zoom. We've started keeping the Zoom room open for 10 minutes after the meeting, just as a matter of routine.
Hmm.
But even doing that, very few people hang around. They
Wow.
head out to dinner or head out to lunch or whatever.
Yeah, I
So,
think with our Zoom meeting that I was talking about earlier, the noon Zoom meeting, because of where it hits different people throughout the world in their time zones. So we
Yeah.
have a couple guys in Australia. It is, depending on the time of year, it could be 5 to 7 a.m.
Yeah.
For them. So they're starting their morning with us. In Europe, it's about 8 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
And here in the US, it's 12 to 3, depending on the time
Yeah.
zone. And we leave the room open for another hour and a half, 2 hours. And it's amazing that some of the conversations that that happen afterwards.
Yeah.
We direct the first like 10 minutes to make sure that all the newcomers have if they have any questions, to be able to
Yeah.
address like that. And then eventually it'll either get really deep to heavy subjects, or just the polar opposite, where we're just talking complete outer
Frivolous
circle
thing.
stuff. Yeah, total. Yeah.
Yeah. That's encouraging to hear, though. We have not tried keeping the room open for a longer period of time.
It's harder when you have a smaller population. With our meetings are generally 85 to 100 people. So
Yeah.
out of that, maybe 30 will stick around.
Yeah.
And then the numbers start to dwindle.
But that's still a good number
Yeah.
to have to and I think it's so important for a newcomer to see us functioning as human beings in a setting other than just the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's an important piece of convincing them that we have something that they might be should seriously consider.
Hmm. Yeah. Case in point, we just did our first annual retreat in person, the first time in 4 years, and just everyone getting to hang out together for an entire weekend.
Yeah,
A lot of people had never experienced that because they came in during the Zoom years.
yeah, exactly.
And a lot of us that had been around for a long time, it was the first time of reconnecting with each other, and everyone just being around each other for that period of time. It was so cathartic.
Yeah, and there's no substitute for that. The technology is wonderful. It saved
Hmm.
us during Zoom, but it doesn't allow for that, you know, arm around the shoulders,
Exactly.
hug, or those sit out by uh, the pool or whatever, wherever the type, in our case, by the lake,
Hmm.
and just talk program with people. It's really, it's something that we missed. We did do a face to face, our first face to face retreat since the beginning of COVID last October,
Hmm.
and we're planning another one this coming October.
Nice.
We go to a campsite. It's actually a Methodist owned a conference camp and conference
Hmm.
center. It has a kiddies camp, but it also has conference facilities, very, very nice conference facilities, and good old down south type greasy cooking.
Hmm. Hmm.
And but it's a beautiful setting. It's in between two mountains.
Oh,
The
gorgeous.
the Appalachians kind of begin to play out as they get down to Birmingham. We're very, very hilly,
Hmm.
but this is about 40 miles northeast of Birmingham, and it's between two mountains, and it's absolutely beautiful setting. And I mean, I've seen three or four of our people who were just having a terrible time struggling with this program suddenly get it
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
that setting where they had actually been going to meetings regularly, but and not picking it up.
Yeah. 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 It's amazing the concentration of program that we get by being away for a weekend, be it a retreat or the convention.
Yeah,
Those types of concentrations. Yeah, I love the conventions, but there's something about retreats being out, in a nature environment that
Yeah.
is, really hits home for me.
Yeah, me too. I love that type of setting.
So just thinking of conventions and stuff, we talked earlier about working on the Atlanta convention, and I know that the one in New York is coming up
Yeah.
in June.
Yeah,
So
about a month from now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have something to say specifically about the conventions there?
Yeah, I love the conventions as well. It's such an opportunity to meet people from around the country, even outside of the US. I have found it very, I'm not going to be able to go to New York this year, which I
Yeah.
had actually already made reservations and flight arrangements, but something has come up that I need to be in Birmingham for. So
Mm,
I will not make it. I've been to every convention since 2004 except Vancouver. So this will be
wow.
only the second one I've missed. But I think it's a great setting. And I'm hoping, and it certainly appears that the sentiment is to put the conference and convention back together
Really?
and
Yeah.
do them both in tandem on Memorial Day weekend again,
Yeah.
like in the older days. It's interesting because Ezekiel, who is chair of the New York Convention Committee, very energetic young guy. Um, he was in one of our focus groups talking
Oh
about
yeah.
communications within the fellowship, and he said that from his perspective, that separating the conference from the convention resulted in putting a kind of a roadblock between the ISO and the local groups.
Hmm. Hmm.
That connection that occurred at the conference convention combined was not happening
Yeah. Yeah.
now.
Yeah, the
I,
the the convention that I worked on, the 2018 convention, that was the first one that it was split. So I think 2017 they were together, and then 2018 was when
yeah,
the conference went to October in Houston, and
yeah.
then the convention still rotated cities. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to see where that goes.
Yeah, I think the question, the outstanding question at this point, Jason, is when to do it.
Yeah.
Because, our current experience, for example, the Atlanta experience, and coming up soon, the New York experience, are kind of atypical in that we're just now coming out of COVID.
Hmm. Hmm.
And, I can't help but be amused myself that COVID screwed up my concept of time passed completely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think of something as being last year or the year before, and in fact, it was 5 years ago.
yeah,
That type of thing. It's like everything went on hold for a 2.5 year period.
yeah.
But I think it'll happen. I would guess probably not in 2024, but possibly in 2025.
Wow, yeah. Is I know that in the Bay Area we're on a short list of future trying to hold the convention here in the Bay Area again. And 2024 is just too soon for us to be able to plan.
To put it
Uh,
together. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, we were looking at possibly for 2025 to try to put in a bid and
Yeah, that
see
would
how
be
that goes.
great. Those have been the both of the conventions in 18, and what the previous one was in '09, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Both of those were great conventions. And of course, you guys completely blow everybody out of the water on the hospitality.
Oh God, yeah. And we went way over budget
I'm sure.
on the hospitality suite. That's where we have food and drinks and stuff. And I guess they went and got some Thai food and
Oh
pizza
yeah, it
and
was
just
a
all
yeah,
sort of stuff instead
it
of
was
just fruits and nuts and chips and soft drinks. They just went
yeah
all out.
everything. And that hotel
Hmm.
in Oakland is a good convention hotel for the our type organization.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
The previous there was a also a before I attended any of the conventions, there was one that was down close to the airport,
Hmm.
down close to SFO. I don't remember what year it was, but it was before 2004. I do
Yeah, it
know.
was I think 2002.
Yeah, somewhere along in there. But I think the hotel in Oakland was better. Plus, for those of us out here in the hinterlands, Southwest flies into Oakland.
Yeah, yeah.
And that for me, that's very convenient. I go from here to Denver and then to Oakland.
Yeah, what's nice
Uh,
about the East Bay is that it's not far from San Francisco. It's pretty centralized. So for me
yeah,
down in the South Bay again, it's about a 45-minute drive
yeah.
up that way. And then for people up in the North Bay, and I know that you've been out to Napa.
Oh,
Got
yeah, several times now.
yeah.
At the 2018 convention, I have a friend from medical school days. He's now retired, but a surgeon in San Francisco, a Chinese guy.
Hmm.
His dad was a surgeon there, and he took over his dad's practice, and he's now passed it on to his son. But I took Bart and zipped
Hmm.
over to San Francisco and had a delightful lunch with him.
Nice.
Back to Oakland, it was simple, really simple.
Yeah. Thinking of ISO stuff as we've been talking about the conventions and the conference, how did you get involved in ISO work? And I know some of the work that you've done, but I'm not sure all of it.
Yeah. Well, it started at the Literature Committee in
Hmm.
2004, which was the Dallas convention. I was elected at that time, we elected them by the regions.
Yeah.
I was elected as the Southeast region representative to the Literature Committee, and I served 2 3-year terms there until 2010 in Albuquerque. And, it really, during that time, came to recognize exactly the value of service at the
Hmm.
international level. And of course, in that 2004 2005 year was the year we approved the first edition of the Green Book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was involved in that process,
Cool.
which, in looking back, was really a neat opportunity.
Hmm. And did you remain on LitCom for years after
No, and
2010?
then I left LitCom. I was on the board. I've done various and sundry other committees. Uh, and then I just finished in October, this past October, I finished another 3-year term on LitCom.
Nice.
And I was eligible for another term, but I decided not to, and I'm on the board now,
Hmm.
um, which I'm enjoying. And of course, we're in the transition from Paul to Tracy as
Hmm.
executive director, and Tracy is really doing some really good analysis and planning for restructuring the internal operation of the office, which
Hmm.
I think it's a fun time to be on the board and be able to watch this up close.
Yeah, the meeting that we had a couple weeks ago, was that as a an offshoot of some of the restructuring and ideas that you and was it you and Bob doing a focus group?
That is a spinoff of the strategic goals that the
Okay.
board adopted in early 22. Worked on a little bit in in 2022, but they've really gotten serious, and there are 5 different work groups, each working on a separate strategic goal to flesh them out, develop tactics, and it's basically a 5-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob H. and I have been assigned the communication, improving communication in the ISO, and that's
Mm-hmm.
our focus groups are really concentrating on that communication piece. And then Les and I are assigned the goal on improving function of the board,
Nice.
and so I'm working with Les on that one as well. And we're going to
Cool.
be doing individual interviews of the board members to talk about things like onboarding, getting into learning about a nonprofit board if you never had any experience with nonprofits,
Mm-hmm.
things of that sort. So it's really good work, and we're having a good time doing it.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like you've got your hands full, and
Oh
which
yeah.
which leads me to the next thing was the Outer Circle, the newsletter. And I know that we've had some cycles going through editors of the Outer Circle.
Yeah, in December, Don quit suddenly, and he was doing a good job, but
Mm-hmm.
he got a full time job and just simply didn't have time
Yeah.
to continue. And so I just told Tracy I would be happy to do it until we could find another editor, which has happened, by the
Oh,
way,
cool.
just in the last 2 weeks.
Nice.
And, his name is Alex
Okay.
B, and he is from Pasadena, California.
Nice.
He's a younger guy. He's been in the fellowship about 3 years, but he's very energetic, and his editing skills are superior.
Nice.
So I'm really pleased, and I think he's going to do a great job. But I've done the last 3 issues or 2 issues and a third one coming up.
Yeah. And that
And
comes out every other month.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's 6 issues a year.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I put out an email back a couple of months ago just saying, here's the theme for the May-June issue,
Mm-hmm.
which is tools of recovery. And we got a flood of new articles, which
Awesome.
has not happened to my knowledge, in the history of the Outer Circle. So we're talking about just a couple of months before each issue to send out an email saying, okay, the issue coming up like July, August is gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, oh, by the way, I got your article.
Awesome.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. It'll be there for sure.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. So that was based on the podcast episode that I did
Yeah.
on
Uh-huh.
gratitude after my unfortunate hospital issue that I had earlier
Yeah.
this year.
That was a scary time. It really
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. And in our email exchange, you had mentioned that you had something similar that happened in 2021. Did you want to
Yeah.
share that here?
Yeah. In April 2021, I started having some crampy abdominal pain in the middle of the afternoon on a Thursday. And by sundown, I was having severe pain. So I went to the emergency room, and they did a CT scan and some other studies. And I had a blockage that was caused by a segment, about an 85 centimeter segment of dead small bowel.
Mm.
I'm convinced. I'm not sure I convinced my doctors of this, but I'm convinced it was a complication of the vaccine.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
that, there's been a lot of those micro thrombosis type
Mm-hmm.
things. My blood supply within an inch of this dead bowel was perfectly normal, but yet there was this long segment of necrotic bowel.
Wow.
And it was removed. I recovered without incident, and doing fine from that standpoint now.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't really convince my doctors as well, but yeah, I think that mine was a complication from the antibiotic that I was on
Yeah.
from the respiratory illness that I had
Yeah.
in January, and I think that was the RSV virus,
Yeah.
respiratory.
And that, to me, that makes perfect good sense,
Yeah.
because that our microflora in the gut
Hmm.
is critical to our immunology,
Yeah.
to the integrity of the lining of the gut. And the antibiotics disturb that
Yeah.
in such a way that something like what you experienced can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, they went in, did the angiogram, the colonoscopy, and they were prepared to cauterize anything that they saw active, and they couldn't find anything. And I had stopped taking the antibiotic probably a couple of days before the first incident of intestinal bleeding. And yeah, so it wasn't until afterwards that we started looking at some of the after effects of this prescription, that prescription. And it's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, this can cause intestinal bleeding. And it's like,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
exactly. Oh,
yep,
yeah. Well, I had it.
yep, yep.
Yeah. Well, that's you were quite anemic, as I recall.
Hmm.
You're telling about that when you got to the hospital after bleeding.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and in the article, I actually went back and looked at my tests. So it was nice is I've got all the results of my tests, so I can see exactly where my hemoglobin levels were at this visit, at that visit, and then how it just rapidly declined.
Yeah.
And yeah, spoiler alert, it got down to 5.9 decagrams per liter,
Yeah.
and I think that is the DG per L. Yeah. And 5.0 is when it gets to heart failure. So
Yeah.
I was I
Right.
was really, really close.
That's well below half of what it should be.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm glad you came through that. And I think
yeah.
the gratitude that it generated is certainly appropriate.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, it was nice that the outer circle issue that's going to be coming up is on gratitude. And you and I
Yeah.
were talking about gratitude, and yeah, wanted to
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that before closing up this episode. So you said you've been really focusing on gratitude lately.
Yeah. What in kind of studying the spiritual principles of that sort of underlie our program, I've kind of zeroed in on gratitude as being something that I can do that is critically important in a number of different ways. And to me, there are two different kinds of gratitude. There's kind of what I call passive gratitude.
Hmm.
I'm grateful that I woke up this morning. I'm grateful I have a decent place to live. I have a decent car to drive. That I'm reasonably healthy for a guy my age, and so on. But that can be unconscious. It can be almost taken for granted.
Hmm.
It doesn't affect me very much, even though if you stop and ask me, I said, sure, I'm grateful.
Hmm.
But what really caught my attention is the value of active gratitude. And I define as conscious, deliberate, intentional gratitude.
Hmm.
The key there being conscious, that I am actively thinking about what I'm grateful for. And what I've found is that changes my mindset.
Hmm.
It changes my relationship with my higher power. It changes the way I relate to other people. To me, it's one of the most powerful things that we can do. It's like an action step to uh, in the process of working the program.
Hmm.
And I think it. I also think that gratitude is kind of the pathway to contentment. And if I'm grateful for where I am, I'm not worried about what I don't have. You
Yeah,
that
yeah.
those kind of things. So and I use the word contentment in the place of the word serenity,
Mm.
because
Mm-hmm.
serenity is a little bit hard to define.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I use the term serenity in talking with people, they may not understand what I'm talking about, but everybody understands what I'm talking about when I say I am content.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that gratitude drives that contentment, and contentment is, in fact, serenity.
Mm-hmm.
So I have found that active gratitude is a critical action that I can take that supports, undergirds my recovery program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So looking at your background that you have, I'm seeing the sunlight come through the trees there.
Yeah,
And I'm in addition to being a musician, I'm also an amateur photographer. And so I love light play in nature settings. And
yeah.
so looking at how light passes through trees or in the environment.
I'll cover my
Oh, yeah.
look at
Yeah.
that.
Gorgeous. Yeah,
Isn't
some
that?
sunbeams coming down through the trees on this dirt path.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can remember being stuck in traffic and starting to have those resentments building.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why is this happening to me? I need to get home. And by being stuck in traffic, I noticed the light that was happening. We had dark clouds off in the distance near the mountains, and this beam of light hitting this one specific tree that I probably drive by every single day, and I never noticed that tree.
Yeah.
And the fact that I was just at a dead stop on a freeway just filled with other cars, the lighting was just perfect that I could actually focus on that tree. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that is active gratitude. And it changed
Yeah.
my perspective for the rest of the drive home. And I was just absolutely fine.
Yeah. I think that what you just said, it changes your perspective. It changes my orientation to God. I'm acknowledging that I'm not God and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not in charge. In an act of gratitude like that. Uh, as we talked about early in this session, is I love walking in the woods and just discovering what's there
Mm-hmm.
in terms of light. Back a few months before COVID hit, I was walking along a river that's just a couple of miles from my condo here, and I was paying attention to the wildflowers and things like that, and not really looking way ahead of where I was. And then all at once, I looked up, and there was a young buck
Wow.
standing about 50 feet from me. And he was just looking at me. And of course, I stopped and was just looking at him. And he looked at me for a few minutes. I didn't move. And he went on down to the edge of the river and crossed the river and went up the hill on the other side.
Nice.
But it was, things like that just are so, I don't know, releasing,
Mm-hmm.
of anxiety and releasing of the worries of the world. And we have lots of worries of the world these days.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I love the illustration of the tree. Every once in a while I'll have an experience like that where I see something that I've gone past every day for weeks or months or years and never noticed it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it always just kind of fills me with gratitude that that I was able to see that
Mm-hmm.
and really recognize it.
Yeah, we I am so bummed that we don't have the opportunities that we did. A lot of us that started off in the program right around the same time, we used to do outer circle hikes on Sundays. And it was before our kids are the ages that they are now. And we had a lot more free time back then. But we used to hike the various mountains around the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And there was one day in particular, I can remember us just all standing around this wide area of a creek. And we're just staring at the water and just, it's like, oh, this is nice. And then we weren't looking for it, but we found a salamander. And
Yeah.
then once we saw the salamander, we saw that there was another one
Yeah.
and another one and
Yeah.
another one. And just had we just not taken the time and just focus on the water, we
Focus.
would have
Yeah.
completely missed it because they're very, very camouflaged down at
Oh, yeah.
the
They're
bottom of
hard
the
to
water
see.
there. But yeah, it's like once we were in tune to looking for it, and this is looking for gratitude or whatever you want to put in there, looking for the positive. It's like all of a sudden we probably saw six or seven.
Yeah.
They just all started popping out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. That is amazing. Just recently I was walking. There's 10 acres of wooded area immediately out my front door.
Oh, nice.
I'm at the end of a street
Hmm.
in a cul-de-sac, and I was I can't walk very far because of my back
Hmm.
arthritis issues these days, but I get out as often as I can. And I was walking on the trail in this wooded area nearby, and there was a little green snake that was about maybe 12, 15 inches long and the size of a pencil.
Hmm.
And he was kind of in the crossing the path that I was on. So I stopped, and he obviously, whether they see or smell or detect heat or whatever, I don't know,
Hmm.
but he coiled up and opened his mouth, like he was going to attack me.
Yeah.
It was just this cute little green
Little tiny thing.
grass snake, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just said, what a feisty little guy.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that just stimulates the gratitude.
Hmm.
It and then as we know, getting out of self is crucial
Yeah,
to
definitely.
success in our recovery, and that's, to me, that's what gratitude does.
Yeah. Yeah. That is amazing. Before we close it out, was there anything else that you wanted to mention?
No, I don't think so. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, and
Yeah.
I hope that others will find it helpful as well.
I'm sure they will. Well, I thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining me on the podcast, Jim.
Thank you.
All
Take
right.
care.
See ya.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Many thanks to Jim for joining me in this conversation. We talked a lot about ISO information, and I wanted to read a little bit about the ISO Board of Trustees and some other things that are on the ISO service website before sharing some music at the end of this episode. So one of the things that Jim had mentioned was the postcard mailers, which is something that is part of PICPC, Public Information and Cooperation with the Professional Community. And I've talked about that on episode 65 with Darren F., where we talked about PICPC. And just recently at our Bay Area Intergroup, we are trying to coordinate with Philip from the ISO office to work on some future projects on PICPC. In years past, we've done postcard mailers and email blasts, and so we're trying to coordinate. I guess the ISO has put that on hold during the pandemic years as the budget has been smaller, so it's now at a level where they can start doing a lot of those campaigns again. So I'm very grateful about that. Jim and I also talked a lot about the convention and conference, and I have talked about both of those on previous episodes of the podcast as well. And so it'll be interesting to see if they continue to remain split as two separate entities or if they go back together at the same functioning on Memorial Day every year like they had been for quite a number of years. One of the things that I have not talked a lot about is the ISO board, and I know a few people on the ISO board, and it was really great to hear Jim's perspective here. And so one of the things that I wanted to read, and this is coming from the ISO's service website, which is saa-iso.org. This is where they have most of the business aspect of what they do. There is a PI CPC page there as well, and I will link these in the show notes. But here's one on the ISO Board of Trustees. And there's a quote from the SAA Green Book from page 92 that says, "Every service board or committee owes its existence to the SAA groups, and its sole purpose is to serve the needs of those groups. Their vision is to be a premier global resource for recovery and support of SAA and the sex addict who still suffers." Strategic goals. In February 2022, the board updated strategic goals for the next 5 years. There were ongoing discussions and planning of tactics and metrics to each of these goals. Fellowship input is requested in helping the ISO of SAA achieve these goals. And here they are. Number 1, improve communications across the fellowship. And that's what Jim and I were talking about, the meeting that I participated in, giving my thoughts and insights on how to improve communications. Number 2, reach underserved communities. Number 3, create a culture of service. Number 4, assist acceptance of sex addiction as a disease. And number 5, improve board functioning. And I wanted to read just a little bit more. Origin, structure, and function. The ISO Board of Trustees, created by the bylaws of the ISO of SAA, as the body responsible for the legal, fiduciary, and operational functions of the ISO, including the hiring of an executive director who is assigned responsibility for the internal operations of the ISO office. The board meets once a year face-to-face for 2 days, preceding the annual meeting of the ISO conference, and monthly by video conference. Additionally, meetings may be called and needed to conduct ISO business. The initial work on issues and proposals to come to the board is done by internal standing committees, or ISCs, which meet monthly by video conference. Finance and operations, which is responsible for the analysis of ISO income expenses, preparation of an annual budget, and oversight of the ISO office operations. Policy ISC, which is responsible for generating and updating policies under which the ISO operates. The Fellowship ISC, which is the umbrella committee for support of outreach efforts undertaken by the ISO. Committees and subcommittees reporting to the board through the Fellowship ISCs include women's outreach, men's outreach, LGBT, intimacy avoidance, prisoner outreach, and the public information and cooperation with the professional community. And then there's also the Seventh Tradition ISC, which is responsible for planning fundraising efforts in order to secure the resources needed by the ISO in support of the fellowship. The committee also assists the ISO office in implementing and promoting special programs such as Lifeline Partners. There's also the Information Systems and Online Presence Committee, which is ISOPCOM. And it is unique in that it reports directly to the board and is empowered to provide guidance to the office on all matters relating to information technology and ISO websites. All of the above board committees typically meet by video conference monthly, and some appoint subcommittees or work groups to address specific issues or projects. So if you are interested in any of this, I will be leaving links for this in the show notes. So yeah, as I mentioned, I wanted to play a little bit of music for this episode. And Jim had talked about the power of music and while in prison, being able to take part in a gospel choir as part of a religious service in prison. And one of the bands that I absolutely love, I've got a few of their albums, is fittingly for this episode, the Blind Boys of Alabama. And I wanted to play a couple of their songs. As a matter of fact, all of these come from their album called Higher Ground. One of the initial ways that I really got into the Blind Boys of Alabama was through the TV show Lost. And I had mentioned that on episode 18, which I talked about my perspective of the TV show Lost and how it relates to recovery. And they have a song, I Shall Not Walk Alone.
We shall be forever bound. And when I'm tired and weary and alone, away from home, I just reach for Mother Mary, and I shall not walk alone. Oh,
Yeah, so that is such a beautiful song. The album title comes from the song Higher Ground, which is a Stevie Wonder song. In fact, all of the songs here are covers. And so, yeah, I wanted to play a little bit of Higher Ground.
keep on praying. Keep on believing. Sleep. Just start sleeping. 'Cause it won't be long. I'm so glad I never tried again. The last time on earth I lived the whole world seen. I'm so glad I know more than I knew then. Gonna keep on trying till I reach the higher ground. Till I reach the higher ground.
Such a cool version of that. And one that is on one of my spiritual mixes is a song called Spirit in the Dark. And I did not realize this until I looked at the lyrics, that this was originally written by Aretha Franklin. But yeah, this is a wonderful gospel tune by the Blind Boys of Alabama.
Getting the spirit all in the dark. Tell all my way to glory. Tell my story. If you feel like shouting, tell nobody doubting. Pray, sister, pray. That's the way you do it in the old time way. Ooh. Got to move. Do you feel like moving? Do you feel like moving? In the spirit, in the dark. Are you getting the spirit? In the dark. People moving. Everybody grooving. You get the spirit in the dark.
So awesome. Yeah, I have a couple of their albums, including a Christmas album. Yeah, I really love that. And I thought it would be fitting, since Jim is from Alabama, to play that here on this episode. So yeah, that is going to do it for this one. I am so grateful for everyone tuning into this. I'm going to save any feedback, emails, and other things for another episode. I'm running a little bit behind this week. I got a lot of life issues coming up this week and next, so I'm not sure quite what the schedule is going to be. I did attend the Bay Area Quarterly SAA and COSA speaker meeting, and I do have the recordings for those, so those episodes will be coming out shortly. Got another guest lined up for next week, as well as a few others that I still need to schedule. I want to get back to our tradition study, and looking forward to that. But if you did want to provide feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you wanted to be a guest on a future episode or part of a panel, or if you just have any general questions, you can email me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And I thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.